I'll just be very brief. Just good morning and good afternoon from to all the participants and our distinguished guests from coast to coast and from all around the world. Michael Lee from the University of Alberta. I just wanted to bring to the focus of the three key issues that for the workshop that are very key to the post-COVID endemicity and the transition from pandemic to endemic state. These are the immunity to SARS-CoV-2 virus and the human behaviors during epidemics, and also pharmaceutical interventions. So hopefully all the conversations from the leading scientists from the diverse fields and the modelers would bring better understanding of the issues and improve the modeling. And I think I should pass this to Professor Jacques Belair, who is a co-organizer, also the moderator for our first theme on contributions to modeling to public health interventions. Jacques, can you take it away?
Yes, thank you, Michael. And so I would like to welcome you to the first technical session of this workshop, where we're going to discuss the how and when and planning a path for the future of the problems and the ingredients which were discussed in the introductory session. So the program is to have first an introductory presentation by 3 speakers, and then more technical presentation by 2 more speakers, and a panel discussion where some of the ingredients presented at first will be discussed at length. So for the first part, it's really a discussion by members of the Mathematics for Public Health Network that will be presented. So Kumar Murty, who's Professor of Mathematics at the University of Toronto and Director of the Fields Institute, Jianhong Wu, who's a University Distinguished Research Professor at the York University, and Nathaniel Osgood, who's Professor in the Department of Computer Science at the University of Saskatchewan, will give us an overview of mathematics for public health. So, Jianhong, I suppose. Oh, first, if I can just point out a few technical pointers that if you have questions during the talks, please write them in the Q&A section, the chat, and they will be passed on to the speakers at the end of the session. And do not forget to turn your microphones off. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jacques. So again, on behalf of the entire networks of Mathematics for Public Health, I want to thank you, Michael, and you for organizing this special event, and for all of you for attending in today. I just want to start to show this picture, this list of the co-applicants of the network, along with members of the International Advising Committee. And Teresa, you are still here, and you can recognize quite a number of names. Those are the modelers that used to work in close collaboration with the Federal, Provincial, and Territory Pandemic Preparation Committee under your leadership. And we appreciate very much the support from NSIC and from PHAC for the National Research Institute to be able to mobilize this national pool of expertise from the coast to coast to coast. So we have a network of 60 more than 60 members strong, and they are from all relevant areas, including dominantly in mathematical sciences, but there are many other important areas that we collaborate. And this network is further supported by a larger network of collaborators, many from the government agencies across the country. And make us even stronger is the creation of the next generation of mathematics for public health. And this is the first product of this network, of the first year of this network to tenure. And we're very proud of this. So this next generation network is created by, coordinated for the trainees. And this is next generation for the government of Canada and Canadian communities to call for their expertise. And it's to say this is organized for the trainees, however many senior colleagues and leaderships, including Nick Ogden here, you can see the picture, did lecture and interact with these trainees through many activities. We treat this effort of building the national capacity not only for the rapid response to the current need, really for the future need. And Professor Said Mugahadas and Nathan Osgood have already offered online graduate credit courses, which is broadcasted across the country online. And the second thing we are very proud of is we created a series of seminars and events to tackle on the issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And the first series was led by Dr. Mishra, an expert in both mathematical modeling and implementation science. And the title is very focus on what we really want to achieve and do no harms, be useful, insightful in the context of communities most affected. The network is supported by the National Research Institute. One of the really advantage of having this is will allow us to have the resources to organize ongoing activities. We have a weekly, very high-level seminar series with speakers from the network, but also from our international network. So this network also create a capacity for the country to be able to not only mobilize our own national expertise, but really mobilize our international connections, international collaboration. We also organize important events depending on the need from the public health decision-making process and from the community. One of the workshop organized by project team led by Jane Hefler and James Watermouth is on the immunity that was organized in November. That was the time really the immunity was key issues, remain to be key issues moving forward. We have already launched 11 projects in addition to a unique project linking the mathematical modeling to rapid decision-making through the EOC, or the Emergency Operations Center operation setting. So that was coordinated by the modelers and also the Disaster Emergency Management Program. So I'll go through a couple of projects to just indicate the significance and the progress we've been making. In one of the projects, we are really trying to develop mathematical technology to identify the shift of contact mixing in the communities and to inform the optimal decision-making that is the community specific, age specific, and setting specific. This is important also for us to move forward to reopen our economy gradually, orderly, and safely. When another project is really taking a more integrated approach to understand the disease, understand the burden of the disease. And this is a project that really has a collaboration with industry, with the financial institutes, and with the economics communities. And I think they are moving towards building not only pioneers of AI technologies, but also really moving towards develop a new theory of vulnerability in public health. The next two projects are, I think, highly relevant to our current interest in for reopening the country, reopening the border, and also relevant to really the availability of the antiviral, the drug treatment. So one of the projects is about infection control during mass gathering events, and this is a collaboration involving even the largest vaccine providers in the country, Sanofi. And the next one is really tackle on antimicrobial drug resistance issues. As I said, when we move into the next phase, when the drug is being used in the larger population to treatment, I think antimicrobial drug resistance is a major issue, and Nathaniel Osgood is involved because we really want to, as Dr. Kumar just said, we really want to take advantage of the signals from the wastewater testing surveillance. So I have projects really taking on more of individual city-based network, and those of you knowing the importance of importation know definitely the name of Julia Reno in terms of global air travel, and Amy Herford and the Atlantic regions of the network on really modeling the importance of mobility and using a variety of mathematical models, including patch models. So I will leave it down here and pass on to Dr. Osgood from the University of Saskatchewan, and he is leading multiple projects, but he might be able to give you more specific contributions in some more details. So Nathan, maybe it's your time. Yes.
Very good. Thank you so much, Jianhong. I'd like to welcome everyone to the event. I'm going to be with you just a brief time to add a little bit more texture to the various projects were described, and specifically, we picked out 3 projects, each in a separate one of those projects that Jianhong has just noted, which align with the features of the symposium. We don't have time to feature these in a really textured way, but I'm hoping it'll give you a little bit of the flavor of each of these, because each is directly relevant to the theme that we're exploring over the next 2 days here. So Jianhong, if we could go to the next slide here. That's great. The first of these focuses on the impact of long COVID. During the opening month of the pandemic, physician scientist Victor Tsang noted that while our initial focus during the pandemic will inevitably be on mitigating and preventing, to what degree we can, the waves of mortality and morbidity extending from COVID-19, the acute phase, most acute, obvious phase of the pandemic, much of the ultimate impact of the pandemic, many of its hallmarks and many of its the longest shadows that it crosses are not, in fact, in those waves of acute morbidity, mortality, but in the subsequent waves of other needs that come from it, whether it's the issues of deferred conditions, heart surgeries, hip and shoulder replacements, preventive surgeries like colonoscopies, whether it's interrupted care for chronic conditions or mental health issues or post-acute needs for rehabilitation. Those may be the defining features of this pandemic if we look at the overall needs for the impact on the health system and health burden. Next slide. It wasn't long after that initial articulation that researchers noted with increasing alarm in alarms that have been rung from the Lancet to New England Journal of Medicine to British Medical Journal, and government commissions in Finland and UK about the growing burden of what's come to be known as long COVID. It also goes by the name of post-acute COVID syndrome or post-acute sequelae of COVID. but it consists of a very concerning level of burden that many individuals who carry COVID, whether asymptomatic and mild on the one hand or severe, face over subsequent months and even years in terms of their health. Next slide. Now, over the ensuing months, researchers have cataloged the extent, the frequency, and the nature of these syndromes. And with a growing body of evidence pointing to impacts of COVID that extend well beyond any one organ system. They extend through the pulmonary system, to be sure, but also the cardiovascular, the gastrointestinal system, issues having to do with reproductive health, neurological and even psychiatric outcomes, nephrology. The whole 9 yards seems to be affected at some level by COVID. And when researchers have looked into the long-term effects of COVID, they found a quite concerning burden, with one systematic review estimating an 80% likelihood that someone will carry at least one symptom for over a month, 60% likelihood for 3 months, and 10 to 20% for 6 months or more. Others have given somewhat different estimates, but the points are clear. These are large burdens and they extend over a wide variety of symptoms and organ systems. Next slide. Now, as time went on, those studying this phenomenon realized that there was a need to parcel out different subtypes to distinguish outcomes of acute infection like fibrosis and stroke secondary to coagulation issues from the effects of treatment itself, the intubation or the steroids. Discovered the need to deal wholeheartedly with the multi-system inflammatory syndromes that come about from autoimmune conditions and distinguish them from some of the distinctive symptoms that occur in the gastrointestinal areas or in terms of orthostatic tachycardia symptoms. So next slide. As these studies progressed, a better and better understanding has been gained by comparing the burden in those who have suffered from COVID from matched cohorts of matched individuals who did not suffer from COVID, finding a very material burden across many areas that collectively suggests the risk that COVID-19 may impose health system impact and health impact comparable to a major chronic disease for coming months and likely years, even if the waves of major infection we've known to also well over the past few years abate. So next slide, Jianhong. We've also found that COVID-19 can exacerbate underlying conditions, leading to big differences in survival rates from other conditions, for example, from those who had suffered severe COVID-19 versus those who had merely suffered mild COVID-19 previously. And next slide. And in a very concerning sphere, we found that COVID-19 can bring out new chronic conditions, such as this report from Mortality Morbidity Weekly Report from the US CDC, noting the emergence of diabetes in pediatric populations. That is not merely a matter of diagnosis, but it seems interference of COVID with the pancreatic system. So next slide. Fortunately, the news is good here that we're not defenseless against this scourge. Immunization seems to protect both against emergence of long COVID in the first place, really lowering its likelihood or its severity of occurrence, and after it's emerged, subsequent vaccination appears to shorten its duration and lower the amount of symptoms that are experienced subsequently for those where it does continue. Next slide. And there's a dose-response relationship with the vaccination. So in order to capture better the impact of this hidden long shadow, a long shadow that's being cast from past waves, and due to Omicron's large infection of many people, large reach within the population, and immune evasion, looks like it might be equally large or larger for this latest wave through which we're suffering right now. We've been building our models used for day-to-day planning across multiple jurisdictions, most notably in the Australia Capital Territories, here in Saskatchewan and in Yukon, these individual-based models to better take into account this phenomenon of long COVID. We use an individual-based lens to capture the heterogeneity involved, vaccination history, and people's progression and care journey, to be able to compare the longitudinal outcomes at an individual level with what we see from the population, and take into account different levels of immune strength and comorbid conditions as risk factors, and system co-occurrence. And the goal here is to project out the health system and health impacts, and to assess the impact of vaccination and treatment and non-pharmaceutical mitigation strategies. So next slide. Now, our initial modeling, and I have to give great credit to our colleagues in the Health Authority who have done so much of this work together with my student Dr. Kurt Kruger, now graduated. But we've mapped out the prevalence of long COVID as best we understand it from the evidence, putting together the evidence from many studies with what we see epidemiologically. And what we found is, the likelihood that tens of thousands are already suffering from long COVID. Mind you, it does abate over time, but its abating is slow enough that we've accumulated mild cases that probably are now well into the tens of thousands, and cases that are severe or critical that lie in the hundreds, if not the low thousands. So we're expanding these models to include multiple etiologies and spheres of effects. And next slide, Jianhong. And we've mapped out how this relates to care-seeking needs. So the degree to which specialist care, interdisciplinary care may be needed. This is a big matter for our health system, not least because our government has taken a hands-off approach, which we anticipated would be disastrous and has proven predictably slow, which will lead to large numbers of people being infected. Even if those infections are asymptomatic or mild, the evidence does show very material risk of long COVID. Okay, so next slide. That was one vignette. I'd like to go on to talk about a second focus. That was from Project 4. This one is from Project 9, a robust model monitoring. And I'm going to have to go faster for these next two to finish up here in time. So Jianhong, if we could get the next slide. So our goal here is motivated by the fact that in many jurisdictions, active case finding is increasingly taking a back seat to distributed testing with rapid antigen tests, lateral flow tests that are going on in homes, not necessarily being reported, and where negative results are almost never reported in ways that really undercut traditional measures like test positivity or even reported number of cases. Passive surveillance looks to be increasingly central to public health and acute care surge planning. And we've turned to, for over a year, wastewater assays, but are now supplementing this with understanding from hospital admissions tests, social media and search behavior, and drawing on the excellent work of Jane and David Buckeridge, Jane Heffern and David Buckeridge, and the Canadian Immunity Task Force in serological status to try to ground our models with estimates from that. And the goal is to have actionable, always updated analytics that fuse together the latest sources of data to inform localized control strategies and trigger surge staffing for what we anticipate may be seasonal co-occurrences of COVID-19 and influenza. Next slide. The goal is to tap particularly strongly wastewater, which can pick up both influenza and COVID-19 readily, something that our collaborators in Alberta have conducted widely, in which other collaborators in the wastewater sphere in Saskatchewan and Quebec can also do. Next slide. So what we have here is a merging of machine learning and transmission modeling, bringing together data on COVID-19 and influenza jointly to help us better understand the spread, where each of those data sources informs the understanding of where the other is going as well, because they do spread ultimately with similar types of contact patterns. We've demonstrated our ability to do this with other pairs of infections. And this is a case where, because of the need for surge staffing planning, we have a particularly urgent need because of the risk to ICU capacity from extending from co-occurrence of these two infections in a seasonal basis going forward. Wastewater data is particularly key, but health system data aids that, and we're increasingly incorporating factors such as mobility data, search data, Twitter feeds, and serology for early indicators, early whispers, as it were, of an incipient outbreak. And all of this allows us to engage in projection, to help inform triggering of surge capacities in our ICUs provincially, and to characterize impacts of potential health orders on the progression of the infection. Next slide. The final vignette, which I'll just be able to touch on for 1 or 2 minutes here, concerns antimicrobial resistance. This does not involve COVID-19, but it is a key part of Project 7. So if we could go to that, click. So within this sphere, what we're building up, and what will ultimately dock with co-lead Syed Moghadas's work on the human community side, is a model that stretches from farm to fork. We have several components of this already built with feedlots, with processing plants, representation of elements of the food supply chain that can lead to antimicrobial resistance that's emerged in agricultural areas, making their way over to human spheres. Within feedlots, within broiler farms, the routine use of antimicrobials for treatment, for prevention, for prophylaxis and metaphylaxis can lead to antimicrobial resistance developing and transmitting in the close quarters. And all of that can transmit to the human sphere through the food supply chain in ways that can then lead to persistence of multi-drug resistant bugs within the human community, which can then be brought into long-term and acute care. And within the sphere, as Jianhong noted, we're turning again to wastewater measurements to pick up this key link, which has been little evidenced of the burden of AMR within human communities. We know a lot more about how it spreads in the acute care and long-term settings, but often a lot of that is brought in from the community. And if we can better get a pulse on what's going on in the human community in terms of AMR spread, and better engage in stewardship in the agricultural area and have system-wide resistance mitigation strategies, we may end up heading off significant risk of hurtling towards an era where so many of our frontline antibiotics no longer work because of the emergence of multi-drug resistance. This has been percolating as an issue during the pandemic, but is going to reemerge in a roaring way going forward with nosocomial infections and with spread within communities. I think that I'll stop there. We're making use of a rich multi-level modeling strategy for this that is informed by understanding of bug-drug interactions, which is fit for task, and which is designed to enable this system-wide reasoning about how can we best intervene, whether on the agricultural side or the human side, to stem this scourge of antimicrobial resistance. And with those comments, I think I'll turn it over to Kumar and commend you to the much more detailed talks on the sphere of this event that you'll be hearing over the next 2 days. Thank you very much.
There's a lot going on here in the Math for Public Health Network, a tremendous amount of research happening. Each one of those topics is worth an entire symposium to dive into. I'm going to be very, very brief to talk a little bit about, sort of related to pique your interest in some of the research we're doing. And so that I'm going to be brief, partly because as a sort of teaser, so that you want to come back asking for more, but partly also because we're already running behind and I want to see if we can get back on schedule. So in project 2, which is called Integrative Modeling, there are 3 kinds of topics that we've been thinking about. One is how do you stitch together different kinds of models when you're trying to understand the impact of the pandemic? For example, if you study caseloads versus some sort of economic parameter like unemployment, how can you build a single model which enables you to find optimal strategies to deal with both of those at the same time? This turns out to be a multidimensional optimization problem, quite an interesting one. And both our group and the group at York has come up with various optimization strategies to manage diverse parameters in this way. Next slide, please. The second piece of work I want to bring your attention to, many of you know this, I often speak about this, is the so-called hurricane model. The hurricane model is something that borrowing ideas from really meteorological research to track the path of the pandemic, as it were. I'm not going to spend any time explaining this slide other than to say, look at the graph, the grid on the right-hand side. It's showing the trajectory in recent times. The blue dots, as you can see here, accelerating through November and into December into the red zone. And then public health measures being introduced and following down by January 18th, we are in the cooling zone. And now currently January 25th, we are actually in good shape with negative acceleration and very low growth. This model allows you to predict possible trajectories. And so if we stay vigilant, then we will follow the trajectory indicated by the orange path, which means we will be going to a significantly controlled situation as far as the pandemic is concerned. Next slide, please. Besides this, Dr. Adam was talking about the importance of data and the access to good data. One component that's missing sometimes in data is public sentiment and what people are thinking about. So Fields Institute has conducted now two surveys, one that we did earlier last year, and the second one that is just beginning to give data now. About close to 7,000 surveys have been completed. And here, what we were trying to figure out is what do people think about boosters? What do parents think about the willingness to get their children vaccinated, and how these attitudes are affecting the way people mix with one another. Results are just coming in, they're being analyzed, but what we see is, I think I want to point out to you one of these conclusions, namely those who seem to, the source of information that people rely on seems to determine, maybe it is not so surprising, whether they are interested in being vaccinated or getting their children vaccinated. Interestingly enough, those who rely on podcasts or friends and family for their information seem to have less interest in being vaccinated. These are interesting data points that need further analysis, but I'm mentioning them to you now only because to pique your interest. And this is ongoing research of Project 2 in the Math for Public Health. Okay, I think I will leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. That will be all from this team on